Mr.ShroomCaster. Hi, I'm Jacob, but everyone calls me Jake. I'm 36 years old, and I live what you might call a regular life. I have a wonderful wife, Kelly, and two amazing kids, 10-year-old Sarah and 7-year-old Ben. We live in a cozy little house in the suburbs of Seattle. I work in IT, my job is stable, and it pays enough to support us. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's ours. And yet, something always feels off. You know how some things in life keep pulling you down no matter how good things get? For me, that something is my parents. My mom, dad, and my younger brother Seth. I'm the older son, but in our family, that doesn't mean much. If anything, it means I'm the one who has to figure everything out on my own. Seth, on the other hand, he's the golden boy, the star child who could do no wrong. I've been his shadow all my life. Kelly, my wife, once told me, Jake, I don't understand how you tolerate the way your family treats you. It's like they deliberately push you aside. She's right. Take this for example. When I got a promotion at work, a big deal for me, I called my mom to share the news. Her response? A disinterested, "That's nice, Jake." And before I could say anything else, she added, "Did you hear Seth started his own business? He's so young, and he's already running a company." It always comes back to Seth. The worst part is, it doesn't stop there. A few months ago, we invited my parents over for dinner to celebrate Kelly's birthday. She put so much effort into making everything perfect. Her signature casserole, a beautiful table setting, even homemade desserts for the kids. And my mom? She walked in with a photo album. Not just any album, an album full of pictures of Seth and his family. During dinner, she opened it and started flipping through the pages like we were there to admire her masterpiece. "Oh, look at Seth on his trip to Hawaii," she gushed. "Doesn't he look so happy? And here's Seth with his business partners, such a successful young man." Kelly's smile froze on her face. She gave me a look that screamed, "Are you really going to let this slide?" But what could I say? It's not just me they ignore. It's my kids too. My parents barely acknowledge Sarah and Ben, while they treat Seth's daughter like a princess. They throw her elaborate birthday parties, buy her expensive gifts, and constantly babysit her. When Kelly suggested we ask my parents to watch our kids for a few hours so we could have a date night, they said they were too busy. I later found out they were watching Seth's daughter that same evening. When I confronted my mom about it, she said, "Jake, we just don't have time for everything. Seth needs us more." It's always Seth who needs more. And Seth? He acts like he's completely oblivious to all of this. Like we're best buddies. But his words always have a certain tone. A subtle jab that he knows won't go unnoticed. Once, during a family dinner, he said, "You know, Jake, Mom and Dad always believed you were the strong one. That's why they didn't need to coddle you like they did me." He said it with a smile, like he was complimenting me. But we both knew better. Seth has always thrived on being the favorite. The person who bears the brunt of this the most, apart from me, is Kelly. My mom has no problem criticizing her to her face. One evening, over dinner, Mom casually remarked, "Kelly, don't you think it's time for you to quit working and focus on being a better wife and mother? Jake shouldn't have to shoulder everything." Kelly, to her credit, stayed calm and replied, "We're fine, thank you. Jake and I make decisions together." My mom waved her hand dismissively. Jake has always needed someone to guide him. He's not exactly the most decisive person, is he? That's her favorite narrative. I'm the one who needs guidance, Seth's the one who needs love, and she's the saint who provides both. And here I am, a grown man, still trying to prove to my parents that I'm worth their time and affection. I know it's ridiculous. Kelly's told me 100 times, "Jake, you have your own family now. Why do you keep bending over backward for them?" But it's hard to break free. These are my parents. And no matter how much they hurt me, a part of me still craves their approval. Maybe that's why I'm sharing this story now. I need to figure out how to stop being the forgotten son and start being the man my wife and kids deserve. When I was a kid, I didn't notice how unfair things were in our family. I mean, I knew there were moments when I got the short end of the stick, but what child thinks their parents love one sibling more than another? Looking back though, it's so obvious. Take what I now call the vase incident. I was 10, Seth was 6. I was in my room working on a homework assignment when I heard a loud crash from the living room. I rushed out and saw shards of Mom's prized Paris flea market vase scattered across the floor. Seth stood there, eyes wide, holding a soccer ball. Mom came running in, her face already furious. Her eyes immediately locked onto me. "Jacob, were you playing with a ball in the house again?" "I wasn't," I started, but she didn't let me finish. How many times do I have to tell you not to run around in the living room? I glanced at Seth, hoping he'd confess, but he just stood there, looking pitiful. Mom didn't even think to question him. That night, I was sent to bed without dinner to think about what I'd done. Seth, meanwhile, got an extra scoop of ice cream for being such a good boy all day. And that wasn't the only time. Seth's mistakes were always brushed off as boys will be boys, while I was held to some impossibly high standard. I'll never forget the time I got a B on a math test in middle school. Dad didn't yell, but his words cut deeper. Jake, you're better than this. How are you going to succeed if you don't put in the effort? A year later, Seth failed an entire class. Mom laughed it off, saying, "Oh, he's still just a little boy. He has plenty of time to figure things out." It wasn't just grades either. In 8th grade, I begged Mom to let me take guitar lessons. I'd been saving my allowance to help pay for it, but she said, "Jake, that's a waste of money. You don't need distractions from school." A year later, they bought Seth a full drum kit, a brand new, top-of-the-line set that took up half the garage. Mom said, "Seth has talent, and we need to nurture that." I kept telling myself it was just bad timing, or that they didn't realize how unfair they were being. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't just what they gave Seth, it was how they treated him. I could win awards, break records, or achieve something incredible, and they'd barely acknowledge it. I remember coming home with a trophy for winning a local math competition. I was so proud. I showed Mom the certificate, expecting at least a smile. "Oh, that's nice, Jake," she said without looking up. "Have you seen Seth's latest drawing? He made the cutest little horse." A horse. My brother drew a horse, and it was somehow more important than my victory. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It happened over and over. When I qualified for the state track meet, Mom didn't even come to watch. She said she had to help Seth with his school play. Seth played a tree. Even the way they talked about us was different. Mom often told me, "Jake, you're the older one. You have to be the example." Dad would say, "You're strong, Jake. You don't need the same attention Seth does." At the time, I believed them. I thought being the older sibling meant I had to be tougher, smarter, more independent. But now I see it for what it was, an excuse to ignore me. Seth, of course, played his part well. He leaned into the role of the needy younger brother. Once, when we were teenagers, he came to me with a broken toy and said, "Can you tell Mom you broke it? She won't be mad at you." I did it, every time, because that's what I thought a good brother was supposed to do. As we got older, Seth's manipulations became subtler. During family dinners, he'd say things like, "Jake, you're so independent. Mom and Dad always knew you didn't need the same kind of help I do." It was his way of reminding me that I was on my own. The worst part? I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me. I started to believe I wasn't worthy of the same love and attention. I thought I had to work twice as hard, be twice as good, just to get half the recognition Seth got. By the time I left for college, I'd stopped trying to compete. What was the point? Seth had already won. Now, as an adult, I look back and see how toxic it all was. But at the time, I was just a kid who wanted his parents to notice him. These days, my life looks pretty good from the outside. I have a wife I adore, Kelly, and 2 amazing kids. Sarah, who's 10 and already dreaming about being an artist, and Ben, who's 7 and loves inventing schemes to sneak extra cookies from the pantry. We have a nice house in the suburbs, and my job in IT pays well enough to keep us comfortable. But no matter how good things are, there's one thing that always drags me down: my family. By family, I mean my parents and my younger brother Seth. Nothing has changed since we were kids. Seth is still the golden boy, and I'm still the one who's supposed to figure it out on my own. The dynamic is the same, except now the stakes are higher and the wounds cut deeper. Take this, for example. A few months ago, I got promoted at work. It was a big deal for me, something I'd been working toward for years. I called my mom to share the news, hoping, maybe foolishly, for some kind of acknowledgement. "That's nice, Jake," she said flatly. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, she added, "Did you hear Seth started his own business? He's so young, and he's already running a company." It always circles back to Seth. No matter what I do, it's never enough to compete with the shining star that is my brother. It's not just me who feels the weight of it. It's Kelly and our kids, too. Last year, Kelly suggested inviting my parents over for dinner to celebrate her birthday. She spent the whole day preparing her signature casserole, handmade decorations, even a cake she baked from scratch. When my parents arrived, Mom walked in with a photo album. During dinner, and I'm not exaggerating here, she pulled it out and started flipping through it in the middle of Kelly's birthday toast. "Oh, look at Seth on his trip to Hawaii," she said, holding up a photo. Doesn't he look so happy? And here's Seth with his business partners, such a successful young man. Kelly shot me a look that said, "Are you seriously going to let this slide?" But what could I say? This is who my mom is. The favoritism extends to our kids, too. My parents barely acknowledge Sarah and Ben. They've missed birthdays, ignored school achievements, and never offered to babysit. Meanwhile, they dote on Seth's daughter like she's royalty. For her last birthday, they threw a party complete with a bounce house and pony rides. When Kelly and I asked them to watch our kids for a few hours so we could go out for dinner, they said they were too busy. I found out later they were at Seth's house, babysitting his daughter. When I confronted my mom about it, her response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "Jake, Seth just needs us more right now. You're independent. You always have been." I can't count how many times I've heard that excuse. And Seth? He plays the role of oblivious little brother to perfection. At family gatherings, he'll make comments like, "You know, Jake, Mom and Dad always believed you were the strong one. That's why they didn't need to help you as much." It's such a blatant lie, but he says it with this smug smile that makes my blood boil. It's not just his words, it's his actions too. Like the time he accidentally let it slip that Mom and Dad had helped him buy his house. When I asked them about it, Mom brushed it off like it was no big deal. "Jake, Seth had a rough patch. We just wanted to give him a little boost. You're doing fine without our help, aren't you?" Kelly tries to stay out of it, but even she has her limits. A few weeks ago, Mom came over unannounced and started criticizing everything about how we run our household. "Kelly, why are you still working? Jake shouldn't have to carry all the financial burden." Kelly, bless her, kept her cool. "We're doing fine, thank you," she said. "Jake and I share responsibilities." Mom scoffed. "Jake's always needed someone to guide him. It's not his fault. He just doesn't have the best instincts for these things." That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't let my mom's toxicity ruin my marriage. Later that night, Kelly said, "Jake, I don't want to fight with your mom, but you need to set some boundaries. If you don't, this will never end." She's right. It's not just about me anymore. It's about my wife and kids. If I don't stand up for them, who will? It was an ordinary day at work when my phone started vibrating. I glanced at the screen and saw my mom's name. She never calls without a reason, so my stomach sank immediately. I answered, my voice already tense. "Hi, Mom. What's wrong?" Her voice was shaking. "Jake, it's Seth. He's been in an accident." The world seemed to tilt. I barely heard her explanation. Seth had been driving home from a meeting with his business partners when a truck slammed into his car. He was in the ICU. They didn't know if he'd make it. I don't even remember the drive to the hospital. It felt like I was on autopilot, replaying her words in my head. Seth might not survive. When I got there, Mom was sitting in the waiting room, her face streaked with tears. Dad sat silently next to her, staring at the floor. "How is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom looked up at me with that familiar mixture of anger and accusation. "How do you think he is? They're operating on him right now. He could die, Jake." I sat down, stunned. Hours passed in agonizing silence until the surgeon finally came out. Seth had survived the surgery, but his injuries were severe. A head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The list was endless. The doctor warned us that even if he pulled through, his recovery would be long and uncertain. I stayed at the hospital that night, even though Kelly had offered to come with me. Someone had to stay home with our kids. It felt wrong to leave, even though I knew my presence wouldn't change anything. The next morning, Mom pulled me aside. Her voice was softer than usual, but I could tell she was building up to something. "Jake, you know this is going to be hard on all of us," she began. "What are you asking, Mom?" I said, already bracing myself. She sighed dramatically, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders alone. "Seth is going to need a lot of help. He'll need someone to take him to appointments, manage his business, help with the house, and look after his daughter when Liza gets overwhelmed. Your father and I are too old to handle all of that." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Mom, I have a job. I have my own family." "I know," she said, her tone suddenly sharper. "But you're strong, Jake. You can handle this. Seth can't. He needs us right now." It was always the same story. Seth needed more, and I was expected to step up. Over the next few weeks, their demands escalated. I was constantly at the hospital, juggling Seth's medical updates with work and my own family obligations. Every time I thought I'd done enough, Mom found another way to pile on. "Jake, did you talk to Seth's doctor about his physical therapy? Jake, can you handle his business calls this week? Liza is too stressed. Jake, When are you going to visit Seth again? He needs to see you. Kelly tried to be supportive, but I could see it was wearing on her. One night, after I came home late from the hospital, she confronted me. Jake, you can't keep doing this. You're burning yourself out, and it's not fair to us. I don't have a choice, I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The breaking point came when Mom showed up at our house unannounced. She immediately started in on me, her voice dripping with disappointment. Jake, you're not doing enough for Seth. He's your brother. For God's sake, how can you be so selfish? Kelly, who had been biting her tongue for weeks, finally snapped. Enough, she said, her voice firm. We have our own family to take care of. If you can't respect that, you don't belong here. Mom looked at her like she'd been slapped. How dare you say that? Seth is in critical condition. He needs Jake. And what about us? Kelly shot back. Do we not matter? Your constant demands are tearing this family apart. Mom started crying, storming out of the house in a dramatic display. I sat there, numb, while Kelly went upstairs to tuck the kids into bed. For the first time, I realized just how much I was risking. My daughter had asked me days earlier, Dad, do you still love us? That question haunted me. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep sacrificing my family for the sake of people who would never appreciate it. After Mom stormed out of our house that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft sounds of Kelly tucking the kids into bed upstairs. My hands rested on the table, shaking slightly. I stared at the empty plates in front of me, replaying everything that had just happened. Kelly had stood up for me, for us, and yet, I felt like I'd failed her. Failed my kids. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. Dad, do you still love us? It wasn't just a question. It was a plea. My 10-year-old daughter had noticed that I was slipping away, drowning under the weight of my family's expectations. I knew then and there that something had to change. The next morning, I drove to the hospital to see Seth. His room smelled like antiseptic, and the steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the air. He looked better than he had a few weeks ago, but he was still pale and weak. When he saw me, he managed a faint smile. Jake, you're here. I wasn't sure if you'd come back. That was all it took to set me off. Of course, I'm here, Seth, I said, my voice sharp. I'm always here. I've been here every single day since the accident. But you? You've never once asked how I'm doing. You've never even said thank you. His smile faltered. I didn't know you felt that way, he muttered. You didn't know? I snapped. You've had everything handed to you your whole life, Seth. Everything. And every time you screw up, Mom and Dad swoop in to save you. And now they expect me to do the same. Seth's face hardened. I didn't ask for this, Jake. I didn't ask to be in this accident or for Mom and Dad to pressure you. Maybe not, I said, taking a step closer to his bed. But you've never told them to stop, either. You let them treat me like I'm your backup plan, and you've never once stood up for me. For the first time, Seth didn't have a clever response. He just looked away, his fingers fidgeting with the blanket. I'm done, I said finally. I'm happy you're alive, and I hope you recover. But I can't keep sacrificing my own family for you. You'll have to figure it out from here. He didn't say anything as I left the room. The next step was even harder. I invited my parents over to our house later that week. Kelly offered to stay for the conversation, but I told her I needed to do this on my own. When Mom and Dad arrived, they seemed cautious, almost wary. They sat down at the kitchen table, and I took a deep breath. Mom, Dad, we need to talk, I began. Mom immediately bristled. What is this about, Jacob? If this is another complaint about Seth? It's not about Seth, I interrupted. It's about me, and about how you've treated me my whole life. Dad looked uncomfortable, but Mom just folded her arms and glared at me. Go on, she said, her tone icy. I love you both, I started, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the one who fixes everything while you ignore me and my family. I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I'm worthy of your attention, but it's never enough. And it's killing me. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. Let me finish, I said firmly. I know you love Seth, and that's fine. But you've made me feel like I'm not part of this family, like I'm just someone you call when you need something. And I'm done with it. From now on, my priority is Kelly and the kids. If you can't accept that, then we need to rethink our relationship. For once, Mom was speechless. Dad finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. Jake, we never meant to hurt you. We just thought you were strong enough to handle things on your own. That's the problem, I said. You assumed I didn't need you, but I did. I still do. And if you want to be part of my life, you need to start treating me like your son, not your safety net. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know you felt this way, she said quietly. Now you do, I replied. They left shortly after that, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I'd stood up for myself. When Kelly came into the room, she wrapped her arms around me. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Those words meant more to me than anything my parents had ever said. The next few weeks weren't easy. Mom tried to revert to her old ways, calling me about Seth's needs and guilt, tripping me when I didn't immediately jump to help. But I held firm. Seth's accident was a turning point for me. It made me realize that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my parents' favoritism or my brother's mistakes. I had my own family, my own life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me.